Hey, it's Mike Rowe, and it just occurred to me that ZipRecruiter has been sponsoring my podcast, The Way I Heard It, for the last 10 years. Consequently, I've agreed to sing their jingle at the end of this commercial in 4-part harmony, all by myself. Why would I do that? Because years ago, when the MicroWorks Foundation was expanding and I was desperate to hire a few uniquely qualified individuals, I posted a job for free on ZipRecruiter, and I found the people I was looking for in less than 24 hours. It's that simple. Ever since, I've been telling my audience that ZipRecruiter got me the most qualified, most interested people. And now I'm telling you. Post a job for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip and watch what happens. That's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. And now, here's their official jingle in 4-part harmony. Build your team. Build it sooner. Meet your match at ZipRecruiter. Try it free.
To get this episode of Forensic Tales ad-free, please visit patreon.com/Forensic Tales.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
On December 27th, 2011, Russ Faria returned home and found his wife Betsy lying on the living room floor with a knife lodged in her neck. She had been stabbed 55 times. Despite having 4 alibi witnesses, cell phone records placing him miles away, and no blood on his clothing, Russ was convicted of her murder. But investigators had overlooked someone else. Pam Hupp was the last person to see Betsy alive. Her story repeatedly changed, and just days before the murder, Betsy had named her the sole beneficiary of a $150,000 life insurance policy. This is Forensic Tales, episode 347, The Murder of Betsy Faria and the Lies of Pam Hupp. Welcome to Forensic Tales. I'm your host, Courtney Fretwell. Forensic Tales is a weekly true crime podcast with a forensic twist. Each episode features real stories highlighting how forensic science was used to uncover the truth. If you enjoy deep dives into real cases and the science behind them, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. And if you want even more content, including monthly full-length bonus episodes and early ad-free access to over 300 episodes, you can join our community over on Patreon. The support there truly helps keep this show going. To learn more, visit patreon.com/Forensic Tales. And one small favor that makes a huge difference for the show, if you're enjoying Forensic Tales, please consider leaving a positive review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps other listeners discover the podcast. The problem with telling a lie is that one lie is rarely enough. Before long, another is needed to cover the first, and then another to keep the entire story from falling apart. But sometimes, if a lie is told confidently enough, people believe it. And by the time the truth begins to surface, the damage has already been done. Before we begin, Pam Hupp has pleaded not guilty to Betsy Faria's murder and is presumed innocent of that charge unless and until she is proven guilty in court. Elizabeth K. Meyer was born on March 24th, 1969, to Kenneth and Janet Meyer. She grew up alongside 3 sisters, and to those who knew and loved her, she was simply Betsy. Betsy was the kind of person who seemed to make friends everywhere she went. She was warm, outgoing, and full of energy, with a big personality that naturally drew people toward her. She also had a fun, spontaneous side. On top of working in the insurance industry, Betsy occasionally worked as a DJ, and she was apparently very good at getting even the most reluctant people out onto the dance floor. She was also the mother of 2 daughters, Leah and Mariah, from a previous relationship, whom she absolutely adored. In 1998, Betsy met a man named Russell, better known as Russ. Then about 2 years later, in 2000, they tied the knot. Like most marriages, theirs wasn't perfect. They argued, and there were times when their relationship became strained. They had even separated for about a year at one point. But despite those difficulties, they stayed together. In January 2010, Betsy was diagnosed with breast cancer. She underwent treatment, and for a while, it appeared she had beaten it. Then, in October 2011, Betsy received devastating news. The cancer had spread to her liver, and it was terminal. The following month, she and Russ went on what they called a celebration of life cruise, where she got to do things like swim with dolphins and just enjoy her time here on Earth. But even as her health declined, Betsy remained incredibly social. She played tennis, spent time with friends and family, and continued trying to enjoy as much of her life as possible. And one of the people who became increasingly involved in Betsy's life during this time was Pamela Hupp, who usually went by Pam. Pam and Betsy had originally met years earlier while working together in a State Farm insurance office. They eventually lost touch, but after Betsy became sick, the two reconnected. Pam began spending more time with Betsy and accompanying her to medical appointments and chemotherapy treatments. And by the final months of Betsy's life, Pam seemed to be around constantly. Pam would even later describe Betsy as her best friend. But according to several of Betsy's longtime friends, that description didn't quite match the relationship they remembered. Betsy had a large, close-knit circle of people who loved and supported her. And Pam was certainly part of her life, especially during her illness. But some of those closest to Betsy questioned whether the two women were truly as inseparable as Pam would later claim. By December 2011, Pam had positioned herself as one of Betsy's most dependable companions. And within days, Betsy would make a financial decision involving Pam that almost no one else knew about. On December 23, 2011, just 4 days before Betsy's death, she and Pam drove down to the local library in Wing Haven. And while there, Betsy asked one of the librarians to witness a signature on a life insurance form. That form made a major change to one of her policies. Russ was removed as the beneficiary, and Pam was named in his place. The policy was worth $150,000. After leaving the library, Betsy and Pam reportedly went to the post office so the form could be mailed. And the timing of that would become very important. State Farm processed the beneficiary change on the morning of December 28th, the day after Betsy was murdered. So why would she leave such a large amount of money to Pam instead of her husband or her daughters? Pam initially claimed that Betsy did want the money to benefit her daughters, but said she was worried that if the girls received the entire amount at once, they might spend it irresponsibly. So according to Pam, she was supposed to hold on to the money, create a trust, and distribute it to them over time, based on certain conditions established by Betsy. But that explanation would continue to change. Pam would eventually say that Betsy wanted her to keep the money for herself, claiming she loved her and would have wanted her to have whatever she left behind. Pam's explanation about the trust was just as confusing. At various points, she said she had created one, planned to create one, or was still thinking about it. Then shortly before Russ's first murder trial, Pam placed $100,000 into a trust for Betsy's daughters. But there was a catch. The trust was revocable, and not long afterward, Pam revoked it and withdrew the money. In the end, Betsy's daughters didn't receive the majority of the $150,000 payout. Now, there is one important detail here. Russ was reportedly still connected to a separate life insurance policy worth about $100,000. So this wasn't a situation where he had been removed from every possible benefit. And that was something ultimately prosecutors used against him as far as motive went. But the policy Betsy changed 4 days before her death was important, and Pam was now the only person entitled to collect it. At the time, however, investigators didn't treat that as a serious motive. In fact, after Betsy's murder, a detective reportedly assured State Farm that Pam wasn't considered a suspect and that the company had no reason to delay paying her. Today, prosecutors view the situation very differently. They now allege that Pam killed Betsy for financial gain and that the sudden beneficiary change wasn't just a coincidence. On Tuesday, December 27th, 2011, Betsy was staying at her mother Janet's apartment in Lake St. Louis. She had spent the night there after the Christmas holiday, and that afternoon she was scheduled to receive chemotherapy. Also visiting was Bobby Wan, a longtime family friend who used to babysit her as a kid. The plan was for Bobby to accompany Betsy to her appointment, so Betsy texted Pam to let her know she didn't need to come. Pam would later claim she never received that message, but phone records showed that she responded with one word: bummer. Despite being told that Bobby was going, Pam still drove to the cancer center. And according to Bobby, Betsy seemed genuinely surprised when Pam suddenly appeared. She then sat with Betsy and Bobby throughout the entire treatment. After the appointment, Betsy and Bobby returned to Janet's apartment. Pam, meanwhile, drove home to O'Fallon, ate a quick dinner with her husband Mark, and then got back into her car. She drove all the way back to Janet's apartment in Lake St. Louis because she wanted to take Betsy home to Troy. The original plan had been for Russ to bring Betsy home later that evening. Tuesday nights were his regular game nights with friends, and Janet lived only about 5 minutes from the house where they met. So Russ planned to pick Betsy up once they finished. Around noon, he texted Betsy to confirm the plan. He told her, "Going to game and then come get you. We'll call when on way. Should not be too late." Betsy responded, "Okay, great, honey." But after chemotherapy, the plan unexpectedly changed. Betsy texted Russ, "Pam Hupp wants to bring me home to bed." She explained that her white blood cell count was low and that she needed to rest. Russ wanted to make sure he understood correctly, so he asked, "She is bringing you?" Betsy responded, "Yes, she offered and I accepted. Didn't get much sleep." Mom snored. That text exchange is important because Pam would later give a slightly different version of what happened. According to Pam, Betsy was the one who asked her for a ride home. But Betsy's own text to Russ suggests Pam made the offer. And she was apparently determined enough to do it that she drove home for dinner and then returned to Lake St. Louis specifically to collect her. All of that is important for what prosecutors would later allege happened that night. When Pam arrived, she waited while Betsy, Bobby, and Janet finished playing Upwards. Then once Betsy was ready, she and Pam left for the approximately 40-minute drive to Troy. As they pulled into Betsy's driveway, Pam called her husband Mark and handed the phone to Betsy. "Merry Christmas and Happy New Year," Betsy sang into the phone, sounding bubbly and upbeat. That phone call is proof that Betsy was still alive when she and Pam reached the house.
Hey, it's Mike Rowe, and it just occurred to me that ZipRecruiter has been sponsoring my podcast, The Way I Heard It, for the last 10 years. Consequently, I've agreed to sing their jingle at the end of this commercial in 4-part harmony, all by myself. Why would I do that? Because years ago, when the MicroWorks Foundation was expanding and I was desperate to hire a few uniquely qualified individuals, I posted a job for free on ZipRecruiter, and I found the people I was looking for in less than 24 hours. It's that simple. Ever since, I've been telling my audience that ZipRecruiter got me the most qualified, most interested people. And now I'm telling you. Post a job for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip and watch what happens. That's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. And now, here's their official jingle in 4-part harmony. Build your team. Build it sooner. Meet your match at ZipRecruiter. Try it free.
Pam said they arrived at around 7, but from this point forward, the lies just keep spreading and spreading. When investigators first asked whether she had entered Betsy's house, Pam said she didn't. Then she changed her answer and said she had briefly stepped inside to turn on a hallway light. Later, Pam said she had actually walked much farther into the house. According to that version, she followed Betsy into the bedroom because she wanted to show her a jewelry cabinet that Russ had given her for Christmas. Pam also changed her description of the last time she saw Betsy. In one version, Betsy was settled on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her when Pam left. In another, Pam said Betsy may have gotten up and walked her to the door. Then there was the vehicle in the driveway. Pam initially made a point of saying she had seen a silver Nissan Maxima outside the house, which made her believe Russ was already home. At one point, she even accidentally referred to the silver Nissan when an investigator asked what vehicle she had been driving that night. Later, however, Pam became less certain. She said the vehicle may have been the Farias' blue Ford Explorer instead. Her description seemed to change depending on which vehicle investigators believed Russ had been using. Pam also said she was nervous about finding her way home from Troy. She claimed that after leaving Betsy's house, she called her because she was afraid she might get lost, even though Pam had been to the house several times before, including within the previous week. That call was placed at 7:27. Pam initially told investigators she called to let Betsy know she was home. She quickly corrected herself and said she meant she was almost home, or at least close enough that she felt home free. But cell phone information reportedly showed that Pam's phone was still in or near Troy when the call was made. Prosecutors have also alleged that Pam sent Betsy a text saying home while her cell phone was still close to Betsy's residence. They believe this was an attempt to create a record suggesting Pam had already completed the drive back to O'Fallon. And while Pam was calling and texting Betsy, someone else was trying to reach her too. Beginning at approximately 7:21 that night, Betsy's daughter Leah called her several times from a cell phone store. She was upgrading her phone, and Betsy had promised her she would authorize the charges over the phone since they were on the same cell phone plan. So she called at 7:21, 7:26, and 7:30, but Betsy never picked up any of those phone calls. Just minutes after Pam claimed she had left her safe and resting inside the house, Betsy had stopped responding to everyone. That night, Russ followed his usual Tuesday night routine. He had worked from home until around 5. Then after finishing for the day, he called Betsy, stopped for gas at a Conoco station in Troy, and called his mother at 5:22 to let her know he wouldn't have time to stop by for dinner. He also had a few errands to run. Betsy had asked him to pick up dog food, and Russ needed cigarettes. So at 5:56, he stopped at a convenience store in Lake St. Louis and bought 2 bottles of Snapple. He arrived at his friend Mike Corbin's house at around 6. The group normally spent Tuesday evenings playing a fantasy role-playing game called Roll Master. But that night, one of their regular players couldn't make it. So instead, they watched movies. They watched the 2011 version of Conan the Barbarian and then started The Road, although apparently no one thought that one was very good. Russ also admitted that he and his friends smoked some marijuana. At around 9, Russ and 2 of the other men left Mike's house, and on the way home, he stopped at Arby's and ordered 2 junior cheddar melts. He then ate them during the roughly 25-mile drive back to Troy. When he got home, he carried the bag of dog food inside and let it drop to the floor. He then removed his jacket and walked toward the living room. That was when he saw Betsy lying on the floor. For a split second, Russ thought she may have collapsed because she was so sick. But when he moved closer, he saw the blood in her hair and pooling around her neck. Betsy's wrists had been cut open, and the black handle of one of their kitchen knives was protruding from her throat. There was also a second knife under a pillow on the couch she was lying on. Russ's mind immediately went to suicide. Betsy had previously attempted to take her own life by cutting her wrists, and she had recently learned that her cancer was terminal. So in that first moment of panic, it seemed possible that she had reached a point where she could no longer cope. So he stumbled away from her body and called the police, telling the operator, "My wife killed herself." But when first responders arrived and took a closer look at Betsy's injuries, they immediately realized that what had happened inside that house wasn't suicide. And all eyes were fixed on Russ as their prime suspect. The first issue was that Betsy was stiff and cold to the touch. Some of the blood on her scalp and wrist had already dried, while the blood in the deeper pools beneath her remained wet. A fire captain and a paramedic supervisor both estimated that she had been dead for more than an hour. Betsy's time of death was later reported as being between 7:20 and 9:41. The second was that her wrists hadn't just been simply cut like you'd expect in a typical suicide. The wounds extended all the way down to the bone. She had also been stabbed in the scalp, through her left eye, and across the throat, severing her right carotid artery. And those were only the injuries first responders could immediately see. Most of Betsy's wounds were hidden beneath her clothing. She had been stabbed repeatedly in the abdomen, and her lungs, liver, and spleen had been punctured. The number, depth, and location of the wounds made it clear that this was not a suicide. The defense would later argue that several wounds produced little bleeding and may have been inflicted after Betsy was already dead. Altogether, she had been stabbed 55 times. The more detectives started going through the house, the more they started thinking Russ had murdered Betsy. The first thing they noticed was that the place was pretty cluttered, but there weren't any obvious signs of a break-in. Dirty pans remained in the kitchen sink, and Christmas decorations and shopping bags were scattered throughout the living room. So detectives considered whether some parts of the scene had been staged by Russ. The other thing that stood out during the search was a pair of Russ's tan suede slippers that were found near the back of his bedroom closet. They had apparently been tossed on top of a pile. What was interesting was that both of them had some blood on them. One had a stain across the top near the toe, as well as blood along the side. The other also had a streak of blood running down one side. But what was also interesting about them was that crime scene techs never found any bloody footprints throughout the house matching those slippers. So if prosecutors believed Russ had worn them to commit the murder of his wife, he somehow managed not to track any bloody footprints anywhere. Those slippers would eventually become one of the most important pieces of physical evidence used against Russ. But the slippers were only one part of what prosecutors now allege was a much larger effort to stage the crime scene, and another important clue may have been hiding on Betsy's own feet. Years later, investigators took a closer look at the blood covering Betsy's socks. According to court documents, the stains appeared to resemble the impressions of fingers rather than toes. The way the socks were positioned also suggested they may have been removed and then placed back onto Betsy's feet after she died. This led investigators to develop a new theory. They now believe the killer may have removed Betsy's socks and pulled them over their own hands, almost like gloves. The socks could then have been used to handle the murder weapon, wipe the bloody light switch, and transfer Betsy's blood onto other objects around the house, including Russ's slippers. According to the probable cause statement, investigators believe the killer may have held the knife and slippers with the blood-soaked socks and then intentionally dipped those objects into Betsy's blood. Then once the scene had been staged, the socks were placed back onto her feet. Later, DNA testing confirmed that the blood found on the knife, light switch, slippers, and a baseball cap all belonged to Betsy. Of course, that testing could only identify whose blood was present. It couldn't tell investigators who transferred it there. But the unusual blood patterns and the complete absence of corresponding bloody footprints raised the possibility that the slippers had never been worn through the crime scene at all. Instead, they may have been planted by somebody to point investigators directly toward Russ. When the house was sprayed with Blue Star, the police said they found a section where blood had supposedly been wiped away. However, they claimed the photographs taken during the test had failed to develop. Years later, however, Russ's defense attorneys received a disc containing 132 crime scene photographs. The pictures had developed. They simply didn't show the glowing trail investigators described at his trial. That matters because Blue Star doesn't react exclusively to blood. Certain cleaning products and other substances can also cause it to glow, so any reaction should be confirmed through additional testing. In this case, lab testing didn't confirm the presence of blood on the kitchen floor, inside the towel drawer, or in the drain pipe. A crime scene investigator later testified that she saw no evidence that someone had thoroughly cleaned the house. And despite the extremely bloody crime scene, investigators found none of Betsy's blood on Russ's body, underneath his fingernails, or on his clothing. He was also still wearing the same shirt and jeans captured by surveillance cameras earlier that evening. And questions about those photographs are still creating legal consequences today. In June 2025, former Lincoln County investigator Michael Merkel was charged with 2 felony counts of perjury related to his testimony in Russ's case. Prosecutors allege Merkel falsely testified that the photographs showed absolutely nothing because the camera had malfunctioned, even though 132 photographs had been logged and several reportedly showed at least some luminescence. Merkel has not been convicted, and those charges remain pending. There was blood on a light switch, but the pattern appeared to have been wiped onto it with a piece of fabric, possibly supporting the later theory involving Betsy's socks. Investigators also recovered 8 sperm cells from Betsy's body. Prosecutors suggested this meant Russ had sexual contact with her shortly before the murder. But sperm cells can remain detectable for several days, and Russ had already told investigators that he and Betsy had sex 2 nights earlier. None of this proved Russ was the killer. But once investigators settled on him as their suspect, nearly every piece of forensic evidence was interpreted in a way that supported that conclusion. Then there was Russ's behavior. Deputy Chris Hollingsworth, the first officer to arrive, noted that he appeared panicked and had difficulty breathing and speaking, but that there were only a limited number of tears coming from his eyes. On the call for help, Russ could be heard moaning, repeatedly saying no and crying out, "My God." But when the dispatcher asked him questions or instructed him to find Betsy's medication, he was able to calm himself enough to respond. Police found that suspicious. Later, while Russ was sitting in a patrol car, Deputy Hollingsworth attempted to distract him by talking about the neighborhood where they had both grown up. For a short time, Russ was able to carry on a normal conversation. At one point, he even laughed. Police found that suspicious too. But whenever the conversation stopped and Russ was left alone with his thoughts, he became extremely emotional again. One officer described his reaction as over the top, and somehow that was also viewed as suspicious. One investigator even questioned why Russ didn't immediately embrace or hug Betsy when he first discovered her, as though there were a correct way to react to finding your wife cold, covered in blood and with a knife protruding from her neck. Russ was taken to the police station and questioned for approximately 10 hours. When he was alone in the interview room, a hidden camera recorded him sobbing, praying, whispering Betsy's name and repeatedly saying no. But when detectives entered the room, he tried to hold himself together and continued giving them the same answer. He had not been home. He had not killed Betsy. He had found her that way. By the following afternoon, he had reportedly been awake for more than 30 hours. He had also admitted smoking marijuana with his friends the night before. Even so, investigators took him to the Lake St. Louis Police Department and administered a polygraph examination, to which he was told he had failed. But like I've mentioned in so many previous episodes of the show, polygraphs aren't a scientifically reliable method of determining whether someone is lying. The results can absolutely be affected by things like stress, exhaustion, medication, and numerous other factors. But investigators used the supposed failure to increase the pressure on Russ. "I found her like that when I got home," he continued to insist. "I walked in the door and found her." But the detectives had already decided they did not believe him. One looked at Russ and said, "You killed your wife." So on January 4th, he was charged with first-degree murder and armed criminal action, all while the person who might actually be responsible for Betsy's murder and framed Russ remained free. One of the biggest things working in Russ's favor was his alibi. As we talked about a little earlier, he worked from home until approximately 5 o'clock. Afterward, he made several stops for gas, cigarettes, Snapple, and dog food. Portions of those errands were documented through surveillance footage and receipts. Russ arrived at his friend Mike Corbin's house at around 6. 4 people said he remained there with them until approximately 9 that night, watching movies and smoking marijuana. After leaving, he stopped at Arby's. Investigators later found the receipt crumpled inside his car, showing that his order was placed at 9:09. But the strongest evidence supporting his alibi came from his cell phone. At Russ's trial, a forensic cell phone expert testified that at 9:25, Russ's phone was still communicating with a tower that placed it at least 10 miles away from his house. His phone didn't even enter the sector covering his home until approximately 9:37. Russ called the police at 9:40. That left only about 3 minutes between the time his phone reached the area around his house and the moment he called for help. During those few minutes, Russ would have needed to arrive home, carry in the dog food, discover Betsy's body, process what he was seeing, and then make the call. If he had his phone with him, there simply wasn't enough time for him to commit the murder. Even under the prosecution's most generous possible timeline, Russ would have had only a matter of minutes to return home, stab Betsy 55 times, cut her wrists, shower, clean the house, move or plant evidence, dispose of his bloody clothing, and somehow avoid leaving any of Betsy's blood on his body, underneath his fingernails, inside his vehicle, or on the clothing he was still wearing. Still, investigators treated the strength of Russ's alibi as another reason to distrust it. The fact that so many details could be independently confirmed didn't persuade them that he was innocent. Instead, they decided his alibi was simply too perfect, and therefore it must have been planned.
Hey, it's Mike Rowe, and it just occurred to me that ZipRecruiter has been sponsoring my podcast, The Way I Heard It, for the last 10 years. Consequently, I've agreed to sing their jingle at the end of this commercial in 4-part harmony, all by myself. Why would I do that? Because years ago, when the MicroWorks Foundation was expanding and I was desperate to hire a few uniquely qualified individuals, I posted a job for free on ZipRecruiter, and I found the people I was looking for in less than 24 hours. It's that simple. Ever since, I've been telling my audience that ZipRecruiter got me the most qualified, most interested people. And now I'm telling you. Post a job for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip and watch what happens. That's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. And now, here's their official jingle in 4-part harmony. Build your team. Build it sooner. Meet your match at ZipRecruiter. Try it free.
To make things worse for him, Pam Hupp had told detectives they should look at Betsy's laptop. And when they did, they found a document in which she purportedly expressed fears that her husband would kill her. But later forensic analysis raised serious questions about that document. It was the only file on Betsy's laptop with its author listed as unknown, and a fragment containing the same text was associated with Microsoft Word 97, even though that software wasn't installed on her computer. Unfortunately, the analysis can't tell us who actually wrote the document. Despite the serious problems with the evidence, Russ went on trial for Betsy's murder in November 2013, but the jury didn't hear the complete story. Before the trial began, prosecutors successfully argued that the defense shouldn't be allowed to present Pam Hupp as an alternative suspect. That meant Russ's attorneys were largely prevented from discussing Pam's financial motive, including the fact that she had become the sole beneficiary of Betsy's $150,000 life insurance policy just 4 days before the murder. The jury also didn't hear the full extent of Pam's changing statements. Instead, she was presented primarily as a trusted friend of Betsy's and a witness for the prosecution. She testified about the problems in Betsy and Russ's marriage and helped reinforce the idea that Betsy had been afraid of her husband. Meanwhile, the blood on Russ's slippers was presented as one of the strongest pieces of forensic evidence against him, even though no bloody footprints matched them and no blood was found on Russ himself. Prosecutors still had to explain his 4 alibi witnesses, the cell phone evidence, and the impossibly short timeline. So during closing arguments, they introduced an extraordinary theory. They suggested Russ had planned Betsy's murder as the ultimate role play, inspired by the fantasy games he played with his friends. According to the prosecution, Russ left his cell phone behind, secretly returned home, and had sex with Betsy before killing her. They claimed he committed the murder while naked, which explained why there was no blood on his clothing. Afterward, he supposedly showered, cleaned the house, and arranged for his friends to return his cell phone and provide him with the Arby's receipt. There was no physical evidence showing that any of this happened. But instead of treating the absence of evidence as a weakness in their case, prosecutors argued that it demonstrated how carefully Russ and his friends had planned everything. And when all was said and done, the jury accepted that theory. After approximately 4.5 hours of deliberation, Russ was found guilty of first-degree murder and armed criminal action. He was later sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 30 years. But his attorneys continued fighting. Over the next 2 years, new information emerged involving Pam, the life insurance money, and evidence that had not been fully presented during the first trial. Among the most significant developments was the discovery that the trust Pam claimed she had established for Betsy's daughters no longer existed. Pam admitted that the trust was revocable and that she had revoked it. That discovery, along with the growing questions surrounding her statements and the handling of evidence in the original investigation, helped Russ's attorneys convince the court that he deserved a new trial. And in June 2015, his conviction was set aside. For the second trial, Russ chose to have the case decided by a judge instead of another jury. And this time, his defense was allowed to present evidence involving Pam as an alternative suspect. The result was what his first jury had never received: a much fuller picture of the case. Judge Stephen Omer heard about Pam's financial connection to Betsy, the inconsistencies in her accounts, and the problems with the forensic evidence used against Russ. He also heard the cell phone evidence supporting his alibi and testimony showing there was no sign of the extensive cleanup prosecutors had described. So on November 6, 2015, Judge Omer acquitted Russ of Betsy's murder. And in delivering his decision, he described the original investigation as rather disturbing. But by that point, Russ had spent over 3 years incarcerated for a murder he didn't commit. He later filed a civil rights lawsuit against Lincoln County and several investigators involved in the case. In 2020, the county agreed to pay him a settlement of just over $2 million. Russ was finally free, but Betsy's murder remained officially unsolved. And the woman his attorneys had been warning investigators about for years was still walking free. But by then, Betsy was no longer the only person close to Pam whose death had raised questions. On October 31st, 2013, just weeks before Russ's first trial, Pam's mom, Shirley Newman, was found dead outside the assisted living facility where she lived. The previous evening, Pam had driven Shirley back to the facility after taking her to the hospital for back pain. The following day, a housekeeper noticed that Shirley hadn't come down as expected, and when she entered the apartment, she found the bathroom water running and the balcony door open. Shirley's body was on the ground below her third-floor balcony. At first, her death appeared to be a tragic accident. Shirley was experiencing symptoms of dementia, had fallen before, and took the prescription sleep medication Ambien. But things weren't that simple. Toxicology testing found an extremely high concentration of Ambien in Shirley's system, reportedly around 8 times the typical therapeutic amount. The balcony itself was also badly damaged. 2 metal balusters had broken away completely, while several others were bent outward, creating a large opening beneath the top railing. No one could quite understand how her body could have generated enough force to cause that much damage. The death attracted even more attention because of something Pam had previously told investigators in Betsy's case. While discussing the idea that she might kill for money, Pam said that if money were truly her motive, there was an easier option. Her mother was worth approximately $500,000 when she died. But that didn't mean she personally received $500,000. Shirley's estate was divided among her children, and the recorded insurance payout to Pam was a little more than $3,500 from a policy intended to cover funeral expenses. Authorities reviewed Shirley's death multiple times, and in November 2017, Mary Case, the chief medical examiner for St. Louis County, changed the manner of death from accidental to undetermined. But Pam's never been charged in connection with it, and there's no proven link between her fall and Betsy's murder. Still, as questions continued to grow around Pam, Shirley's death became another bizarre part of the story. And 3 years later, when yet another person died inside Pam's home, investigators would no longer be willing to go along with all her lies. On August 16, 2016, Pam called the police from her home in O'Fallon, Missouri, and reported that a man was trying to attack her. That man was 33-year-old Louis Gumpenberger. Louis had suffered a severe brain injury in a car crash in 2005. The crash left him with significant cognitive and physical disabilities. He walked with a limp, had very limited use of one hand, and rarely traveled far from the home he shared with his mother. But according to Pam, Louis had somehow arrived outside her house in a car driven by someone else. She claimed he jumped into her car while holding a knife to her throat and demanded that she drive him to a bank to get Russ's money. Pam said she managed to knock the knife away with what she described as a karate chop. She then ran through the garage and into her house, where she grabbed a gun from her bedroom. According to Pam, Lewis chased her inside like a madman, forcing her to shoot him in self-defense. Because Pam had called police before the shooting, much of what happened next was captured in the audio. Shortly after noon, she shot Lewis 5 times in the hallway of her home, but almost immediately, investigators noticed that her story didn't make sense. Given Lewis's physical and cognitive limitations, police questioned whether he would have been capable of carrying out the complicated attack Pam described. They also discovered that less than an hour before the shooting, Pam's cell phone had been in his neighborhood, reportedly near the front door of his home. That directly contradicted her claim that she had never met him before. Then investigators learned about a very strange police report filed just 6 days earlier. A woman named Carol had been approached by a blonde woman claiming to be a producer for Dateline. The supposed producer introduced herself as Kathy and offered Carol $1,000 to help reenact a 911 call for an upcoming episode. Carol initially agreed and got into the woman's vehicle, but the situation quickly began to feel wrong. There was no camera crew, no business card, and nothing proving the woman actually worked for Dateline. So Carol changed her mind and asked to be taken home. Fortunately, her home security camera captured the vehicle, including its license plate. It belonged to Pam Hupp. Another man also reported being approached with a similar offer. Investigators came to believe that Pam had eventually found Lewis, presented herself as a television producer, and offered to pay him for participating in a fake police reenactment. They believed she then brought him back to her house and shot him as part of a plan to frame Russ Faria. The items found at the scene made that theory even crazier. Inside Lewis's pocket, police found $900 in cash and a handwritten note containing instructions to kidnap Pam, take her to the bank, and retrieve Russ's money. The note promised an additional $10,000 if the person followed through. It also instructed the supposed attacker to kill Pam and make the scene look like what had happened to Russ's wife, including leaving a knife sticking out of her neck. The note appeared designed to suggest that Russ had hired someone to murder Pam, but investigators were able to trace the cash back to her. 4 of the 9 $100 bills found in Lewis's pocket had sequential serial numbers, and a 10th $100 bill found on Pam's dresser continued that sequence. Police also discovered details suggesting Pam had researched how to make the story appear believable. The note instructed the attacker to leave money in a woodpile at a property connected to Russ. Surveillance footage later showed Pam's car driving past that location in both directions shortly before Lewis's death. The knife Pam said Lewis used was found wedged between the passenger seat and the center console of her car. Investigators noted that Pam stored knives in her own kitchen in a remarkably similar way, wedged between the stove and the countertop. They also found a small carpet swatch positioned on the floor near his body. Investigators believed it had been deliberately placed there to protect the rug from his blood. The day after the shooting, Pam's husband was seen carrying a white garbage bag from the house to her car. And inside were several items connected to Betsy's case, including Betsy's death certificate, transcripts of Pam's police interviews, and records from Russ's first trial. So at this point, investigators believed the entire scene had been staged. Their theory was that Pam selected Lewis because his disabilities made him easier to approach and manipulate. She allegedly lured him to her home with the promise of easy money, planted the knife, cash, and note, and then killed him to create a story in which Russ was once again the villain. The possible motive was clear. By 2016, public suspicion surrounding Pam had grown significantly. Russ had been acquitted, he had filed a civil rights lawsuit, and federal authorities had begun reviewing Betsy's case. So investigators believed Pam killed Lewis in an attempt to redirect that suspicion back toward Russ. 1 week after the shooting, Pam was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and armed criminal action. While being processed, she asked to use the restroom. Then once inside, she used a ballpoint pen to stab herself in the neck and wrists in an apparent attempt to take her own life. The case was scheduled to go to trial in 2019, with prosecutors planning to seek the death penalty. But before that could happen, Pam entered what is known as an Alford plea. An Alford plea allows a defendant to continue maintaining their innocence while acknowledging that prosecutors have enough evidence to obtain a conviction at trial. Pam claimed she accepted the deal to spare her family from having to sit through what she called an ugly trial. She was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of Louis Gumpenberger. And once she was behind bars, prosecutors finally turned their attention back to the murder that had started everything: the death of Betsy Faria. In June 2019, just after Pam entered her Alford plea in Louis Gumpenberger's murder, Lincoln County prosecuting attorney Mike Wood announced that Betsy's case would be reopened. Investigators conducted a new review of the forensic evidence, cell phone records, witness statements, and the way the original case had been handled. Then, on July 12, 2021, nearly a decade after Betsy's death, Pam was charged with her murder. Prosecutors allege that her motive was the $150,000 life insurance policy Betsy had placed in her name just days earlier. According to their theory, Pam intentionally positioned herself as Betsy's ride home on December 27th. Even though Betsy already had transportation arranged. Pam drove home after chemotherapy, ate dinner, and then returned to Lake St. Louis specifically to collect her. Prosecutors believe Betsy trusted Pam and willingly allowed her inside the house. Exhausted and physically weakened from chemotherapy, Betsy reportedly settled onto the sofa beneath a blanket. They allege that Pam attacked her there while she was resting and completely caught off guard. The state believes Pam then staged the crime scene to resemble an act of domestic violence committed by Russ. As we discussed earlier, investigators now theorize that Pam removed Betsy's socks and wore them over her hands while transferring blood onto objects throughout the house. They believe she dipped Russ's slippers into Betsy's blood, placed them inside his closet, and then returned the socks to Betsy's feet. Prosecutors also point to her changing stories and cell phone records that appeared to show she remained near Betsy's house longer than she claimed. And according to the state, Louis Gumpenberger's murder was the final part of Pam's effort to protect herself. They allege she killed Louis and planted the note about Russ's money to make it appear that Russ was still dangerous and willing to hire someone to silence her. Pam has pleaded not guilty to Betsy's murder. Although she was convicted in Louis's case, she hasn't been convicted of killing Betsy and remains legally presumed innocent of that charge. Now, as the case moves toward trial, a new forensic dispute has popped up. Looking for a fun way to get everyone off the couch and into a little friendly competition? Meet QR Hunter, the customizable scavenger hunt game that turns almost any space into an adventure. Using the QR Hunter app and 5 reusable QR code tiles, you can create your own clues and hide them around your house, backyard, neighborhood, or even a local park. Players scan each code to reveal their next clue, then race to see who can complete the hunt the fastest. It's perfect for birthday parties, family game nights, holiday surprises, team building activities, or anytime you want to make an ordinary day a little more memorable. You can completely customize the hunt, play with one person or a whole group, and set everything up right from your phone. QR Hunter works with both Apple and Android devices. To create your own adventure, search QR Hunter Scavenger Hunt on Amazon and order your set today. Pam's defense requested additional testing of evidence collected from Betsy's home. Her attorneys say YSTR testing detected male DNA on multiple items, reportedly including the handle of the knife left in Betsy's neck. YSTR testing examines genetic markers found on the Y chromosome, which means it can detect male DNA even when it is mixed with a much larger amount of female DNA. According to the defense, that male DNA doesn't belong to Russ, so they argue the finding could indicate that another man handled the weapon and may support Pam's claim that she didn't kill Betsy. But the result doesn't tell us who contributed the DNA, when it got there, or how it reached the evidence. Touch DNA can be transferred through ordinary handling or even indirectly through another person or object. And because YSTR profiles are shared by men in the same paternal family line, they generally can't identify one unique individual in the way a complete autosomal DNA profile sometimes can. So while the result may become important at trial, the presence of unidentified male DNA doesn't independently prove that an unknown man murdered Betsy or that Pam didn't. We will have to wait and see how that piece of forensic evidence unfolds. The trial was originally scheduled to begin in August 2026, but that date was canceled after the case was assigned to a new judge. Prosecutors later agreed to take the death penalty off the table in exchange for Pam waiving her right to a jury. Her bench trial is now scheduled to begin on January 31st, 2028. More than 16 years after Betsy was murdered, a judge may finally decide whether prosecutors can prove that Pam was the person responsible. The investigation into her murder didn't fail because there was no evidence. It failed because investigators decided what that evidence meant before they had fully examined it. Blood on Russ's slippers didn't prove he wore them during the murder. It couldn't explain how the blood got there, especially when there were no matching footprints anywhere in the house. A chemical reaction from Blue Star didn't prove that someone had cleaned up blood. The reaction could have been caused by other substances, and the lab tests didn't confirm blood in the places investigators claimed it had been wiped away. 8 sperm cells didn't establish that Russ had sex with Betsy immediately before killing her. Sperm can remain detectable for days, and Russ had already told police that he and Betsy had been intimate 2 nights earlier. Even Russ's supposedly failed polygraph and his emotional reactions were treated like evidence of guilt. When he cried, investigators thought he was being dramatic. When he calmed down, they thought he was cold. No matter how he behaved, they found a way to make it appear suspicious. Meanwhile, the evidence that challenged their theory was explained away. 4 alibi witnesses became co-conspirators. Cell phone records became proof that Russ had left his phone behind. The absence of blood on his body and clothing became proof that he had committed the murder naked and carefully cleaned himself afterward. And while ordinary details from Russ's life were treated as evidence of an elaborate murder plot, Pam's constant lies were repeatedly excused as memory problems. That's the danger of tunnel vision. Once investigators decided Russ was guilty, they stopped asking where the evidence led and started asking how they could make it lead back to him. Betsy's murder was presented to a jury as a simple story. A troubled husband killed his terminally ill wife and created an elaborate alibi. but the forensic evidence never supported that story. Investigators forced it to fit, and while an innocent man sat in prison, the last known person to see Betsy alive remained free. Whether prosecutors can prove that Pam Hupp murdered Betsy will ultimately be decided at her trial. Until then, she is presumed innocent of that crime. But one conclusion is already undeniable. Tunnel vision didn't simply derail this investigation. It shaped the evidence, determined what the jury was allowed to hear, and delayed justice for Betsy for more than a decade. To share your thoughts on this week's story, be sure to follow us on social media at Forensic Tales. And if you want to listen to new episodes early and ad-free, consider signing up for our Patreon at patreon.com/Forensic Tales. You can get early ad-free access to new episodes and monthly full-length bonus episodes for as little as $3 a month. Your support on Patreon directly helps to fund the show's production, research, and editing costs. And as an independent one-woman podcast, your support truly helps to keep this show going. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell. If you'd like to support the show and help fund research, production, and editing, you can do so with a small monthly contribution on Patreon. Patreon supporters get early access to ad-free episodes and exclusive bonus content. You can learn more at patreon.com/Forensic Tales. And if you enjoy the show, leaving a positive rating or review really helps others discover it. For a full list of sources used in this episode, visit forensictales.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings.
Hey, it's Mike Rowe, and it just occurred to me that ZipRecruiter has been sponsoring my podcast, The Way I Heard It, for the last 10 years. Consequently, I've agreed to sing their jingle at the end of this commercial in 4-part harmony, all by myself. Why would I do that? Because years ago, when the MicroWorks Foundation was expanding and I was desperate to hire a few uniquely qualified individuals, I posted a job for free on ZipRecruiter, and I found the people I was looking for in less than 24 hours. It's that simple. Ever since, I've been telling my audience that ZipRecruiter got me the most qualified, most interested people. And now I'm telling you. Post a job for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip and watch what happens. That's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. And now, here's their official jingle in 4-part harmony.
Build your team, build it sooner. Meet your match at ZipRecruiter. Try it free.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.